ornate, often incorporate columns and that kind of stuff. But I took us to this street because there's a lot of them over here. And these buildings are what makes Soho special. They're made of a very specific material that it makes it a little bit unusual. Anyone know? It's not brick. It's not. Huh? That's a great answer. Not quite. They are made of iron, you guys. These are metal buildings. Soho is known as the Soho Cast Iron Historic District because right here in the neighborhood of Soho, we have the largest collection of cast iron edifices on the face of the earth. Why did we build buildings out of cast iron? Well, back in the turn of the 20th century and the end of the 19th century, factory owners becoming rich off of the new industrial revolution found that this was quite simply the most cost-effective way because there were a lot of accidents in these factories at this time. And say, there's a fire or there's an explosion and, your facade just gets blown off. No problem. You just pour in some iron in the cast and just hook it right back up there. It's kind of like assembly line style construction. It's all a trick. All of these columns are just part of a big piece. They're not actually holding up anything. And you'll notice they're a little skinnier than columns you would see on, like, say, a marble building. So, okay, they're pretty cool buildings, then why don't we have them anymore as factories? Well, that's because as nice as it was for the owners, it wasn't very great for the workers. During this time, we are in the middle of the United States' and the world's really greatest immigration wave. 12 million immigrants between 1892 and 1924 arrived through the Ellis Island Immigration Facility, and most of them, who come from very poor rural communities in the interior of Europe, have no skills that are marketable in an industrialized world except for base factory work. And so they come to work in these factories. Work in these factories, you guys, in the turn of the 20th century, is really not much of a step up from slavery. We're talking 12 to 14-hour days, 7 days a week, no benefits. If you got sick, you are fired. If you get hurt even on the job, you are fired. There are no protections. And eventually, this leads to a horrifying incident. In the year 1911, one of these old factories, known as the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, burns down with 146 immigrant workers trapped inside. It's still known today as the deadliest industrial disaster in the history of New York City. And it was a major catalyst to start the progressive movement, establishing some basic safety precautions, some basic benefits for people who are working in these places. And after a while, these buildings were deemed unfit as places of work. And so by the 1930s, 1940s, they start to be liquidated and factories start to move outside of the city, mostly in New Jersey or out in Queens. And so for most of the 20th century, from that point onward, this area falls into a deep financial depression. There really isn't any investment going on here. Not a lot of people are living here. And by the mid-1950s, this area gains not a very nice nickname. It's known as Hell's 100 Acres. Well, eventually, some people start to move into Hell's 100 Acres who simply don't have enough money to live anywhere else. I'm talking about artists, young artists who are used to living in places no one else wants to live in. And they started to come in around the 1960s. By the 1970s, this area starts to get a reputation for being kind of funky and kind of cool. Lots of creative people around, taking over the interiors of these old buildings, basically squatting a lot of them. I actually knew my mom's best friend lived in one of these old buildings in a studio apartment in 1978, fresh out of film school at NYU. And she told me she paid $90 per month for her own studio apartment. And every single day she had to bathe herself, she would have to take the bathtub out from under the kitchen sink because there was no bathroom. There was just a little toilet in the corner. She would take it out from under the kitchen sink. It would be covered in creepy crawlies. She'd then have to take her spray the whole thing and kill all the bugs, then clean the bathtub, take water in a bucket from the kitchen sink and fill up the bathtub, take her bath, and then put it right back into the kitchen sink and put the bathtub under the kitchen sink to do the whole thing again the next day. Not the most comfortable lifestyle. Well, as these artistic people start living here and living in that situation, other people start noticing this neighborhood. Wealthy people. But wealthy people don't want to be doing that crap. And so they start to buy up these buildings and fix them up on the interior and exterior. A lot of these buildings today are beautifully painted, they're beautifully ornate, but I want you to keep in mind, back in the 60s and 70s, every building would have looked more like that one. Take a look at that brown one over there. It is not dirty, guys. It's actually just completely rusted. Again, these are metal buildings. So a lot of money was invested to take off the rust, give them a fresh coat of paint, renovate the interior, and add all these luxurious amenities. And voila, by the mid-1990s, this was one of the most expensive places in New York to live. And now there are very few struggling artists living in this neighborhood. I used to say there are no struggling artists, and I was actually corrected by someone on the street who taught me that there is a very small community of people who originally moved here, who have rent control, rent stabilization, and still live in this neighborhood. So I want to give them a little shout out just in case they're around watching. Yeah, nowadays, if you're wondering how much you're going to pay for an apartment in here, it's not really $90 a month. If you want a studio, we'll say not a one bedroom, a one room with a little bathroom attached to it and no stove, no kitchen, you're going to be looking at probably around $2,500 a month. One bedroom, maybe $3,500 to $4,500 a month. A two bedroom can often go up to above $10,000 per month. If you want to buy something, you are not going to be able to buy anything for less than $1 or $2 million at the minimum. So there you go. If you're wondering, I don't live in this neighborhood. So guys, we're going to make it. Yes, I love that. You're my favorite. So we're eventually going to make our way over to the biggest, most beautiful, and greatest of all of these cast iron buildings that has a very, very special significance. So